part of the Earglue Media family of podcasts.
You're listening to the Cantina Cast, your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Albert and Jonesy in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cantina Cast. My name is Albert Padilla, and this is episode 287, Age of Rebellion, Part 2. Yes, as promised, we are going to cover the best of the best, if you will, of some of the stories. And looking back now at the Age of Rebellion, we're going to wrap this all up with stories from Vader, Yoda, and Luke Skywalker. And joining me tonight is none other than our resident rebel at large, Jonesy. I was trying to do something there. Welcome back.
Terrible.
I know. You'll get that joke later. How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. It's glad to be back. We had a week off.
Yeah.
But good to kind of be back in the seat to get the rust off here a little bit.
Yeah. The summertime has been kind of interesting so far. So
it's been crazy.
Yep. And let's jump. We're gonna jump right into this and start talking about some stuff here, starting with the news. And we don't really have that much news. Like, there's a lot going on. If you're in like the spoiler world of Star Wars, there's all kinds of stuff to talk about. But we don't do that here on the show. We try to stay away from the spoilers. But nonetheless, we did have a couple things. Maybe it was about almost 2 weeks ago now, and we haven't had a chance to speak about this. The first thing I want to talk about is Del Rey had a Ask Us Anything night on Twitter. And they basically just kind of pose this question. You can ask us anything you want, and they would try to respond or one way or the other. And so there were some really odd questions and some questions that were just, kind of dumb. But there were some pretty good ones in here. I guess maybe I may be overselling it a little bit, but there were some interesting things that came out of it. Anything stand out for you? We've got a whole list of things here, but what were some of the standouts for you from the answers or questions and answers?
Well, I think a couple weren't surprises at all, right? The demand for the audio dramas has been noted, I think they said. And that's not committal, but they're looking at these things closely because they want to be able to present another means of consuming content. And I think the audio dramas, I think that's a really interesting way they can continue to go.
Yeah.
A couple of others maybe that weren't as surprising. Again, they have no plans for a canon prequel trilogy novelization, which, we've got a lot within the Clone Wars, which I guess they're going to kind of go back on that a little bit because they said maybe they'll go back for more Clone Wars.
They said there's always a chance.
Right. And I think I don't know if that's Dave Filoni or who that specifically is that would help drive and shape that type of story. I mean, they've had some good books in that era as well. And I think there's definitely a demand for Ahsoka in particular of what did she do during certain phases, especially when she went away. Of course, we're going to get some of that in the Clone Wars series, but we always want more, these little stories. Yeah. I liked the Clone Wars comic books in particular. I thought those were really great.
Yeah. Now,
what about you? Any interesting ones in here for you?
Yeah, I mean, there was some stuff in here that was more confirmed than anything else, like the, getting Dooku Jedi Lost in written format. They talked about treason, the new Thrawn book. The Infus Nest was interesting. And again, non-committal. They didn't really say whether or not anything was going to happen. But when asked about whether or not we would see any Infus Nest content come in the way of book format, they said that they dug her quite a bit, and that was all they left it at. So kind of maybe hinting at something there. Hopefully, we've talked about it on the show and said that we definitely need more Infus Nest in some way. So if it comes to the book, that'd be great. Yeah,
exactly. There's a couple of characters that we would like to get content on, and you and I have talked about it. Infus Nest is one of them, and then another one is Sabine. Like, Sabine doesn't have a ton of really Sabine focused content that we would consider. She doesn't have like an Ahsoka novel or a Kenobi novel or a Plagueis, something that really focuses on that character, even for a given, period in time. And so those two characters they're ripe for it because they're, Sabine's fairly well known, especially in our circles.
Yeah.
But I think Infus Nest, there's not a lot known about her. There's a lot to try to explore there. And why not? I mean, it's great. I mean, and these are the books that there's not a lot of pressure to deliver, or there's not a lot of, hype around it usually because they're a lesser known character, I guess, outside of the Star Wars hardcore fandom. But they have these abilities of like really introducing audiences, especially the ones who like to read, into a character and be able to pull a lot of things out that they can then see what's sticking. And it's kind of a low risk maneuver. I mean, it takes a while to do these types of things, but it's kind of a low risk maneuver because there's not always a lot of expectation like there is with a movie or a TV series or something like that. You don't have you don't have all the scrutiny, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, I agree. Let me ask you a question real quick. And it's not really specifically about the feedback and the questions and answer that came from Del Rey, but just overall, if you were to look back at all of the books that they've done since the whole Disney and buyout, that kind of thing, what would you grade them? On a letter grade scale from A to F overall. Ooh. Again, collectively, how would you rate Del Rey and Disney's takeover of written books since comparing that to Legends, of course?
Yeah, man, that's tough because we've had some really, really good ones. But we've had some that really, at least for me, fell a bit short. Mm-hmm. And to be fair, Legends had a lot of duds too. Yeah. I mean, we have absolutely. This very rose-colored glasses with Legends. But let's be honest. I mean, like the new Jedi Order series, for as much as I liked it, there were a lot of books in there that did not need to be there for the most part. But overall, I like that we're getting a steady stream of content. I like that we've branched out in a couple spaces. But I'm probably still a bit on the critical side to them. And I'd probably give them, if I'm being generous, maybe like a B minus. I probably feel like it's closer to a C plus, B minus, something like that. Yeah. Again, we've had some really good ones. Claudia Gray, of course, is one of our favorites. But there are some others that were a little less than desirable. I won't like name names or bash any of them, but we've had some. I think the novelizations, or the Last Jedi novelization, I thought was pretty solid. Yeah. Force Awakens was more of a retelling of sorts, but so I think there's so it's kind of a mixed bag, which I think is not surprising for a big franchise in the novel in the I can't think of the word, the novelization type of space or the creative writing type of space. Yeah, and you're gonna I would agree, and you've got a lot of different writers, right? They've got different backgrounds in terms of what they're good at, their strong points, and some of this is a lot of these writers. This was their first shot in the Star Wars. They've never really written anything before, Star Wars specific, even though they may be New York Times bestsellers and that kind of thing. Sometimes that doesn't always translate. So we find that with directors too. They may go off and do some great movies, and they come over to a new format or a new franchise and not really do as well. And that's just the way it goes sometimes. I would say overall, I would agree. It's probably in the B. I maybe give it a B plus just because of the highs are high and the lows can be kind of low, and maybe that's enough to give me a B plus. But I mean, overall, if I just said, am I happy with it? Yeah, I would say these have been good. I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed reading Star Wars novels and Star Wars comics and anything else. It's not the movies, so. Yeah, it's really just a couple authors I really miss. Like, I really miss Karen Traviss. Mm-hmm. Like, what she did with the Republic Commando series is still some of my favorite character building and really lore and world building, what she did with the Mandalorians. And it's really, I mean, that's never going to happen, or it seems like that's never going to happen. They had a pretty considerable falling out. But even I'd like to see Christy Golden get back into the mix too, because I really like Christy Golden's writing. I thought she did really well in the World of Warcraft books as well, which I'm kind of into. And I would like to see her get back more involved too. And just, again, a little bit more variety. And I don't know if Christy Golden's got anything coming up or not. Or she's on a different line too these days.
I think she is. Yeah, she's not usually, I mean, if she did, she would have been at one of these panels. Maybe, I don't know, maybe she pops up to D23 here coming up soon or something. But I haven't seen her or heard from her in quite some time, at least not in Star Wars. Yeah.
That's one I'd get excited about that one if they announced her coming back into the fold.
All right, well, let's move on and talk about the other bit of news that we had here. And this one is, I don't know what to make of this one. We were talking about it just before coming on the air. There's rumors, I guess, or maybe it's been confirmed at this point, that there are Blu-ray re-releases coming on September 22nd of this year. And this looks to be all of the movies, including Solo and Rogue One, re-released on Blu-ray. And I have to ask why. And there's been a lot of speculation on it. There's a lot of fans that are saying this could be the original unaltered versions of like the original trilogy and that sort of thing. But when you look at the running times, they seem to line up with the versions that we have today. If you were go out and buy I don't think you can anymore, but if you were to go pick up the more recent Blu-ray set, the runtimes are all the same. So it doesn't look like they're going to be the unaltered versions, as much as a number of fans, myself included, would like just to have those in a very high definition version. But it does question why they're releasing these. Any thoughts around that? You had one thought, and I'm kind of setting you up here, but you had one good thought. Only one.
Main thought is it's a cash grab right before you come into a major release.
We know that one. That's a given. I'm something beyond that. No, you had mentioned it's been a while. You can't pick these up. It's been, 4 years now, you said?
Yeah, they've been around. These came out in 2015 was the last time we got the Blu-ray set. And remember, that had a big to-do. And I think what would be disappointing this time around, and it doesn't, like you said, there doesn't seem to be any remastering or anything like that. There were so many color correction problems with the Blu-ray set that it was really bothersome. And I think there was even some audio issues on A New Hope. I believe they had the TIE fighters panning from the wrong sides. I believe that was still in the Blu-ray. But it would be really unfortunate if they didn't go back and touch some of that up, so we don't have pink lightsabers and some of that, because I got to be honest, it really did detract from the enjoyment of what was otherwise going to be really the definitive copy of Star Wars entirely with what we got from the original Blu-rays. Now, they did come out with the ones that the repackaging, I believe, and I thought that was, I have a hard time believing if that was the 2015 release. I guess the original Blu-ray was way further back than that.
Yeah, the little book set, I guess, if I don't know how to describe it.
Yeah, they did like the little 3-pack. Yeah, that was the white cover with Anakin on the cover.
Yeah.
The original one, right?
Yep.
And then we had the others that had like the more silver box set with Vader on it. I think one had Yoda for the different eras. But yeah, I mean, it's been a while, I guess. You got to do these. You refresh these. What better time? But you also know that within a year or two, probably about 2 years, they're going to come out with another box set that's going to have all 9 of the Saga trilogy. And then whatever else they decide to do with Rogue One and Solo, maybe you can tack them in there as a definitive collection as you start to get it ready for the next trilogy in 2022.
Yeah. I mean, if nothing else, we'll get some really cool packaging. It will be kind of nice to see them all. If they come out with some type of, I won't say color scheme, but market it so that they're all together and they look similar in some way, even the Rogue One and Solo's Star Wars story. That'd be really nice.
You remember that with the VHS, right? When they did the THX certification on the VHS, and they went and streamlined all the box art, and it was great. And I love seeing variations of the box art. I think that's a lot of fun, and I would like to see them do something a little bit different and a little more stylized, I guess, just to give it a little different flair. Just, I mean, give people a reason to go buy something else that they already have on their shelf and make it a semi-compelling purchase, at least visually, because there's a lot of Star Wars fans are out there. Wow, that's different. I got to go buy it just so it's part of my collection.
Yeah.
Now, you could call that a crap move, but well,
it wouldn't be the first time they've done it either.
No, it wouldn't be. But again, I'm not holding my breath that there's going to be any new bonus content. There's not going to be any new commentary. It's hard to believe that we'll get much more than just a kind of an update on the visuals. But man, I really like to see them fix the color correction, but I'm not sure. I think this might be the first. Is this the first one issued under the Disney property, though? I thought I remembered reading that, but I'm not sure about that.
It might be. If not, it's not the original one. That book one is, I'm pretty sure, is not.
Right.
The ones you mentioned, the single re-releases that came out right after that, about 2 years later, that may be the 2015 and may coincide with the purchase of by Disney. But I
can't remember. That seemed like it was after Disney too, but I'd read something that alluded to that, and it was a little uncertain, but I don't know. It doesn't matter. Yeah. We'll see what we get. Yep. It's only a month and a half away.
Yeah, not much longer. Okay, so with that, let's talk about our main show. Again, we're going to be talking about Vader, Yoda, and Luke Skywalker stories from the Age of Rebellion comic series that just came out a couple months ago from the Disney Comics. And the first one, Darth Vader, is it's a story. Again, these were all written by Greg Pak. Although it was Yoda, I forget now if Yoda was or not. I can't remember. We'll find out in a minute here when I get to my show notes. But Greg Pak is the story writer, and Raymond Box did the art for this one. And the name of this particular issue is called To the Letter. And I'll just quickly read this first part here. It says, "The Republic is no more. The Jedi Order is destroyed in the age of a new empire. Emperor Palpatine rules the galaxy with his mighty, mysterious apprentice Darth Vader at his side. Vader has slaughtered many Jedi and brought in entire systems to their heels. So what more does the Dark Lord have to prove and to learn?" So that's the kind of lead into it. And really, this story, just to kind of recap, it's set kind of in the events. It sets in before the events of A New Hope, where Vader, he kind of disobeys a direct order from this governor, and this kind of displeases the Emperor. He almost kind of scolds him, and we're going to talk about that because this is not the first time we've seen that before. He kind of scolds him in front of this and basically says, "Hey, you need to start doing everything this governor tells you, because if you're his will is my will," kind of thing. And so there's a series of like 3 missions that he and this governor then go on. And at the very end, Vader kind of has his, I guess, revenge, if you will, and finds a way to kind of get the governor killed. And somehow there's a lesson that's learned in all this, and we'll touch on that here in a second. But that's the gist of what happens in this comic. So before we get into the specifics, what were your thoughts? I guess overall initial thoughts on this particular story, because we've got a lot of Vader recently, right? It feels like we've covered a lot of Vader content here in the last year or so. But how did this one fit in overall with that? And did you enjoy this one?
This one, when it started off, I was actually very concerned because this felt like it was going down the same path of where we've been a little bit more critical of how many times do we have to watch Vader get beat down by the Emperor or by somebody around him. And it started off that way, and it did kind of do that. Mm-hmm. But I think overall it got to a better place to where we have to talk about this, but I didn't know. I was unclear if this was it was pretty clear what was going to happen. He was going to do everything to the letter. God, I can't believe I just did that. He was going to do it specifically the way that he was supposed to, like he was told, and it was going to work out in his benefit. That was pretty much clear. But I was surprised I actually enjoyed that aspect of it where Vader was just relentless, and we got to see Vader's power, and we got to see him really single-handedly take on armies and defeat them against really, really impossible odds, right?
Yeah.
And so that was really nice to see the strength of Vader. And it wasn't, I think one time we had him, he was a little bit still on fire or something like that in one of the panels, but it wasn't this completely torn apart and missing limbs or things were ripped out. He came out of each of these encounters more or less unscathed compared to what we had seen him in a little bit closer to the events of Revenge of the Sith in the original Vader comics. But so I was happy that they kind of took the character a different way, even though they started off a lot of like what we had already seen where he's just getting beat down.
Yeah, I would agree. And I was kind of worried about that too. I guess, when I started reading this comic, there were a couple things also that were kind of interesting. Like the governor relationship was an interesting one for me because let me just back up. The Emperor himself has some really terrible leadership. And I've made this comment before. Like, I think, and I get why he does it. I'm not going to sit here and defend or try to argue with the Mike Rondos of the world. But it's just a horrible plan in terms of what he's doing leadership wise, because he tells him that he has to obey the governor. And he also says, but when I'm not here, you are, of course, the next in command kind of thing. So he sends him these mixed messages, which I get why he's doing it. But it just, again, this is all just proves that he was a terrible leader. And eventually that was his folly. And then why he fell because of his, his overconfidence kind of thing that Luke points out. But it was interesting, though, that the governor and Vader, there was a moment there early on in the comic where they're both in front of the Emperor and they're both talking about what had happened. And it was like shades of what my kids do, right? Like so-and-so did this. And then he's calling him out right in front of the Emperor, and the Emperor is scolding him, that kind of thing. But it just seems kind of a low blow type move from the governor in this. The other thing that was interesting is these 3 missions. I think he called them, I called them impossible missions because they really were. It was kind of cool to kind of get to see Vader in that light again. We've said it before, especially in some of the other comics, just being able to see him take on these, impossible missions, if you will. The only thing I felt like we were missing, though, is I really wanted to see what was going on. Like we got, we saw him jump in. We get that he, overcame these impossible odds, impossible missions, but we didn't really get to see it. And that's the part that I kind of missed about it all.
Yeah, I agree. Those were really good stories, especially with Anakin, right? When we got a lot of that in the Clone Wars of being able to see his leadership in battle. And we haven't had a lot of it as Vader with others around him. We got a little bit in the last Vader comic, but really overall, we've not really had enough that really says, here's his leadership qualities in the Empire or as Darth Vader rather than as Anakin Skywalker. And I'm kind of starting to think maybe that's intentional, is that he is not near as invested, or I mean, he's definitely not near as personal, right, with his troops. But I agree. There's a story there that I would like to see more of. I understand why they moved through those very quickly so that we could see this is over time. It's not a 1 day, 2 day event where he all of a sudden had the light bulb go off and knew exactly what the Emperor wanted him to do. And, everything worked out. So I get why they, streamlined that a bit.
Yeah.
But I think I'm with you, though. It was really nice to see kind of Rogue One Vader show up.
Yeah, exactly.
But also, it would be nice to get a little bit more of that smaller snapshot of moment story of kind of like the tales of Vader or the battles of Darth Vader that he's had with the 501st or with the troops. And they have really intentionally left a lot of that out.
This comic, we kind of skipped over this. I want to come back to just real quickly. It opens up. It's very different than all the other ones. Like, we don't get the title page with all the artists and everything. That comes like 3 or 4 pages into the comic, which is very different than all the other ones we've gotten so far. But early on, the reason why the governor is so upset with Vader, and what he does is he disobeys an order that the governor sets up and says that, hey, I don't want, I think there's some coaxium that the rebels are kind of squatting on, and the mission was the governor's mission was to secure that coaxium. And Vader decides, and he goes Top Gun Maverick on the governor and jumps into a ship and goes down there and just blows up everything. And his defense is the rebels were going to get away or whatever, right? If had I not done this kind of thing. But that was kind of an interesting thing, because to me that felt more Anakin Skywalker than Darth Vader, which I thought was nice. And maybe I'm reading too much into it, but that's the impression I got when I read that first part of it, was that this is Anakin Skywalker coming out, or that, Anakin is still in there somewhere. And this is totally something I could see Anakin doing as opposed to Vader.
It is, but I'm going to talk a little bit this with the Yoda one too. It's more about the moment in time that we are of when we get these types of, like, why is it like if we're right close to A New Hope, and we're taking some liberties right there, but if we're bumping up to A New Hope, is that really in character for Darth Vader at this point?
No, I would say no. I don't think it doesn't feel like it is.
Right.
And I guess that's my point, is it felt like Anakin Skywalker more than Vader. And like, where did this guy come from?
Yeah, exactly. By this point in his journey, we would expect that really Anakin Skywalker is largely dead, right? And Luke is the one that really sifts in there and finds him in some way. And this part, this is a bit more jarring. If this was, again, with that first Vader series, that makes a lot more sense to me. But this one, it doesn't fit. And then for, like you said, for him just to snap into it and then do everything by the book, again, it just, this I don't know, this childlike quality still within him is frustrating given the timeline that we're at, even though we got all the really cool stuff as a result of that. So yeah. I kind of forgive that aspect of it.
Yeah, no, that's fair. There was an interesting bit in here a little bit later, and it's right after the Emperor's kind of scolding him, and we're getting into that territory where we kind of felt like we knew it was coming. There's a moment in here where, first off, where Vader is like furious. Like, you can see him. He's so upset that he's having to kind of fall in line and be scolded and right in front of this governor. I mean, he takes a knee at one point as the governor just kind of stands there behind him, takes a knee in front of the Emperor. And you can see how just furious he is with all of this. And it kind of cuts over. There's a really neat moment here where, in that moment where he's sitting there and being scolded, I guess, if you will, by the Emperor, he has all these flashbacks, and he remembers, as a kid, it shows him he's kind of sitting there scrubbing the floor, and Watto's standing behind him and probably scolding him, yelling at him for, disobeying. the next little bit is him standing there in the Jedi Council chamber, and Mace Windu telling him that, that he's not going to be a Jedi Master, right? Yeah. So that's very fresh.
Have a seat, son.
Yeah, it's basically that same line. And then the next one is a terrible moment where Obi-Wan Kenobi's standing over him as he's burning to death there on Mustafar at the end of Revenge of the Sith, and Obi-Wan is disappointed in him and saying how he was the one that was supposed to bring balance to the Force, that kind of thing. And then the last one is the one that we got from one of the comics where, the Emperor is kind of shooting with lightning. I forget if that was the 2015 or the 2017 comic series of
2015,
Vader.
I believe.
Yeah. But it cut back to that one too. So, it just shows you that he's had this history. He's had this line ever since he was Annie back over there with Watto, of these, leaders that are just either find fault in him and call him out for it, or really kind of lay into him and scold him and demean him and, whatever else. But the reason I bring that up is because when we've talked about this before, but if you look back at the last 40 years now, my perspective and opinion of Vader just kind of keeps changing. And I don't know how much, I don't know how much more I can take of this, because, it's not really in a bad way, right? With Yoda, we'll get to Yoda in a second, because in Yoda, and you and I have talked about this, my perspective and opinion of Yoda has changed greatly since I was 8 years old, and not in a good way. But I would say it's almost the opposite with Vader. Like, Vader was always the bad guy as a kid, especially obviously in A New Hope and Empire. Although in Empire, you kind of started getting shades that maybe there was some good in him. But today, he's really not a bad guy at all to me. Like, I have so much more sympathy for him. I mean, he's a very pathetic character. And I mean that in the nicest way possible, I guess. But when you see stories like this, and, the Vader comics that we've covered so far, some of the backstory there, I mean, you really feel so sorry for this guy, and I don't think I would have ever said that coming out of The Empire Strikes Back. But anyway, that's just kind of that. Any thoughts there?
Well, first of all, the spread you talked about with him in the flashbacks was probably my favorite spread in any of the books we've read so far in the Age of Rebellion. It was really well done. I thought they did a really nice job of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I want to feel bad for Vader, and then I remember he killed a bunch of younglings. So I just don't. But no, you're right though. We have had a lot of new color commentary on Vader in particular that has tried to soften how we view him. And I know there's some people who really don't like that. And I'm not one of them who really dislikes it, but I'm also someone who really empathizes with that perspective, because I know we've talked about this a couple of times, but it's just a way that we want our bad guys to be bad and to have, and it is it diminishing what Luke was able to accomplish with Vader, I think, is the part that's the most difficult to continue to feel like that's eroding, right? That question, it used to be all Luke, right? Because that was all the content we had.
Yeah.
But now it's these signs of all these other things in place. Now they make a lot of sense, right? We know how the Emperor is. We know the resentment that Vader had of him because of all of these things, and how he's really no different than a number of the other people in his life that he always wanted to escape from. And so you feel bad for him from that respect, but again, it still comes back to choices, right? And we're going to figure out what this means for Ben Solo, Kylo Ren here pretty soon.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because that's honestly where I was trying to segue into, is at some point we're going to have the redemption conversation. Not to spoil anything, but we've got that lined up to talk about here right before the movie comes out. I think we do want to talk about the redemption aspect of it all, and I think this is going to play into it a lot. I think we're going to be leaning into that by leaning on some of the storylines here that we've gotten with Darth Vader, and with all the atrocities that he's committed and the horrible things he's done. He seemed to have been redeemed, and in the eyes of many fans, I think he's been redeemed. So how does that bode for Kylo Ren? Is it any different? And if it is, or if it is not, then why? That kind of thing. So it is an interesting perspective, and I would agree that it does, and on some levels, it can erode at the original story and the original intent, and how that was kind of framed in our eyes back a long time ago. So
you post this in the notes before we move on. So what do you think the lesson was here? What was the lesson he was supposed to learn?
Yeah, I don't. So I'm going to sound like a complete idiot here. I don't know that I understood what the lesson was, and that's why I threw it in the notes. Because so at the very end of the comic, he finds a way to the last impossible mission, and I'll just kind of cut to the chase. The last impossible mission, Governor R, I guess is his name. I don't know if he's a pirate. Governor R is like, hey, you need to go out, and they go out into this like asteroid field or something, and there's like this 4-clawed lobster monstrosity. And I was like, I wasn't.
Isn't this Godzilla's problem?
Well, yeah, it looked like something from the old Godzilla movies from the 60s and 70s. But anyways, so Vader heads out there, and then at the last minute, he turns his ship around and then comes back towards the Star Destroyer that he's been working with R on.
Right. Yeah. The governor, just to set it up a little bit, the governor told him to go destroy the greatest threat, which, of course, he interpreted to be this lobster thing. But of course, we all know different because we're not dumb.
Yeah.
So we know that this is going to come back to him.
Right. And so this lobster thing comes in there and it kills him. I think it breaks through the glass on the Star Destroyer, grabs him, pulls him out and into space and kills him. And therefore the greatest threat, at least in Vader's eyes, has been killed. And at the very end, Vader takes a knee. At the very end, he's talking to Vader the Emperor, and the Emperor tells him that he's done well and that this lesson was now learned. And I don't know what the lesson was. I really don't. I mean, I guess it's because that there's double play or double talk in what the Emperor says. I don't know. I really don't. I don't get it. Did you?
I think I simplified it.
Okay, good, because I really don't know.
Right. It's more of a do what the Emperor says, and it's all going to work out. Don't worry about it. I'm really not oversimplifying it. I think it really is do as serve his will, and at some point what we both want will align, and all will be right. But it was such a weird way to tell that story because it didn't seem to really. I think to your point, it didn't really land that message very well.
Yeah.
Because there were probably 5 or 10 better ways they could have done that and had a more interesting, I think, story to it. But I don't know. We got some badass Vader moments, so I guess that's okay.
Yeah. I mean, I got hung up on the 4-clawed lobster, but beyond that,
right,
I would agree. Yeah. Well, I'm glad that's why we hired you because, I didn't figure that one out.
All right. Put my request in for a raise with Mike.
You're coming up on your 2% annual increase, so you can look forward to that. 2%
my costs go up 2% up by 4%.
Yeah, that's true. All right. All right. Do you want to move on from anything else on this one?
Nah, let's do Yoda.
All right. So Yoda, Yoda's a very well. All right. So with the Yoda story, it was a little different. Again, this was the one that was found in the annual or the special. And so we did talk about this one a little bit already, or at least we mentioned it. And I think we did the Biggs and Porkins episode, which if you're not a Patreon user, you haven't heard it. If you are, hopefully you've had a chance to listen to it. Hopefully you enjoyed it. But we did pull that one out of there. And I think the other ones like were IG-88 and was that it?
Yoda, yeah, and Yoda. Yeah,
and Yoda. Okay. So we're not doing the IG-88 one. But we are doing the Yoda one. Anyways. So the recap here is this one's set just kind of like literally right. It's set in the during the events of Empire Strikes Back, and it bumps up right up against Luke crashing into the planet of Dagobah, as we see in the movie there. But we've got a Master Yoda here who's kind of haunted by his failures. Right? He's reflecting back on all of the failures as the the Jedi Order and the Republic, and certainly his leadership. And he's obviously living this isolated life on Dagobah. He gets hungry. He decides that he's going to go out and do some hunting because he needs meat, which I thought was interesting. And in the process of doing that, you come to realize that he no longer wields his lightsaber, and it's a form of penance for him. And so he said instead he's constructed this kind of like primitive bow and arrow, although it does look a little bit more modern. But he constructed this little bow and arrow. He is going out and he's killing these, I don't know what they are, these meat creatures or something.
Yeah, look like cats or something.
Sure, right. Kills them, And on his way back to his little hut there, he falls he's on some really shaky ground. It falls. He gets completely buried by a bunch of rubble, and starts this. Has some more inner reflections of what's going on, that kind of thing. Remembers that he's a Jedi Master, then uses the Force to kind of free all the blocks off of him. And right about that moment, as he's getting closer to his hut, that's when Luke crashes, and his sense of hope has been renewed, because this is a kid that he's seen in dreams that he's had just more recently. He's been having these reoccurring dreams, and he kind of puts two and two together and realizes this is all the Force, the will of the Force at play here, and things are going to get better. So that's kind of the gist of what happens in the comic book. But so same question overall on this one. How did you feel about the storyline and getting to see Yoda? I mean, I think this is something we can all honestly say, that any Yoda story is probably a good story because we know so very little of him. But for me, it was when I saw that it was opening up on Dagobah, I was like, wow, this is going to be kind of cool. We're going to get to see Dagobah more than what we saw in the movie, because we really haven't seen much of anything really. But any thoughts there?
Right. If you take out the last couple of pages, I actually really enjoyed the story. I like the idea of it. I like seeing Yoda struggling with the fallout of his actions, and the recalling, and just the challenges that it's presented to him at really a spiritual type of level, right? The doubt that's now ingrained in him, and really the guilt and everything else that's just been accumulating for him. So I think I really liked seeing that story. I liked the moment where he finally kind of snaps out of it and starts to see things more clearly. Well, having a bunch of rocks dropped on you, I don't know if that's really the moment I would have expected, but it was nice to see some of the parallels as well, like him hanging like he did in Revenge of the Sith. So we had some nice, ironic type of moments, which he is very self-aware and notices that. But
yeah,
so I really liked that part of the story. I liked all of that. The part where I had a hard time is again, the timing of it. Why did this story have to bounce or to bump right up against Empire Strikes Back and Luke landing on Dagobah? He's been here for 20 years, right? So I would have expected this moment to have happened a little bit earlier, rather than really just, has he been sulking for 20 years?
I think that was what they were trying to hit, because there was many times in this comic book where they talked about hubris, blindness, and shame. In fact, they use those three words like at least 2 or 3 instances in a very short span. Because remember, this is only a very short story in that special, but they kept hitting on that over and over again. And it at least for me, I walked away thinking, man, this guy has really, really had a rough time of sitting here living for 20 years with this level of shame and this level of doubt, right? And this level of humility and regret and remorse and all these other, feelings. Like, this is just a very lonely, pathetic life that he's been living here, by himself and with all those past memories of all the wrongdoings that he was responsible for ultimately at the very end there.
Right.
Yeah. And there was, with this Yoda story, the only other thing is, I mean, it's convenient, I guess, right? Because it allows you to go, oh, cool, this is the moment right before that. That's really neat. I think that's one way. It can. I don't want to cheapen it by saying that, but there may be just something there about it that they decided to put this right before that. That way, you could kind of link them two together. I don't know. They could have easily just said, he could have easily just went back to his hut and then had another dream or a vision that Luke was coming, and that would have been the end of it. Doesn't really tie into The Empire Strikes Back like that as well, but they could have done that if they wanted to kind of play it safe. The one thing that I thought from this story that maybe they were trying to do as well is explain why Yoda is in such bad condition. I know he's 800 years old. I know he suffered the battle with Sidious, and there was definitely some damage done to him there, but he seemed pretty okay at the end of Revenge of the Sith. And maybe this was a way to explain that he's so frail, and he really is at his the very last moments of his life, if the last year of his life, because of this accident that happened. I mean, getting crushed by this much rubble and stones and bricks or whatever it was, the stones and all that had to have done some damage. And it wasn't like he used the Force to prevent that. I mean, he was completely buried with the exception of up to his head, and then used the Force to free the rocks. But you got to think there's probably some internal damage, especially with somebody that old. And maybe that was one of the reasons why they did this story, was to kind of, again, explain how he was in the condition that he was in Empire Strikes Back, and then, what we saw in Return of the Jedi. But I may be looking too far into that.
You're entitled to your opinion. No, that might be a bit of a stretch for me personally, but I can see where you're going with that.
I can be an apologist at times too. So,
yeah. Well, I think it's also, especially the humor when he laughs at himself.
Yeah,
and he basically calls himself an old fool, and kind of the things that he's challenging Luke on in Last Jedi, right? So it's nice to see some of those parallels, and I really like that aspect of it. And you could see that it's now a very fresh moment, but his resolve is also at odds with what we see in Empire Strikes Back, where then he is resistant to train him. And we could argue, and again, from an apologist kind of standpoint, we could argue that he is testing Luke rather than just firmly believing that, no, I'm not going to teach this kid, when clearly he has every intention to teach this kid.
Yeah.
Right. So some of those things are a bit at odds a little bit, but you could see at least a little here of why maybe he approaches this as a more humorous type of engagement when he first engages with Luke in Empire. But I don't know. I like the story though. I really did like the story. And I thought that it was, for within a special, I thought this was like really pretty solid. And Mark Guggenheim wrote this, and we've enjoyed some of his work in the past. But I thought this was really a pretty well written story for the most part, and to be very centered on Yoda again with things we want.
Yeah.
But now the question I have for you is that if we get a story between Revenge of the Sith and this moment, what the heck does that even look like now?
I don't know.
I mean, they've basically cut off. Again, I'm overgeneralizing, but it feels like we can't really have anything super meaningful in a 20-year blank period for Yoda. And that frustrates me a little bit, because I was hoping that we'd get, more of these types of stories in there, at least in little fits and starts. And granted, you can still do that and you can still move things along, but now you can't really have any major type of moments.
Yeah.
And
I mean, we're left to believe that this is it. This is as good as it got. This is the most action he's seen in 20 years.
Yeah. That's disappointing. That's really disappointing.
Yeah. Well, but maybe anyway, he's got 800 years prior to. Maybe they'll touch on that at some point.
There we go.
Just
first 200.
They won't.
Yoda, the first 100 years.
Yeah. Speaking of Mark Guggenheim, there was the other thing I had in my notes here. To your point, there were some really good lines in here, like some really good writing.
Right.
Earlier on, when he's talking about, he's carrying the saber. He doesn't carry his lightsaber anymore as a penance. It says, for the hubris that led to the fall of the order, for the blindness that led to his exile, for the shame of knowing that the consequences of the failure even now continue to plague the galaxy. That was pretty powerful. And then later on,
it's good.
There was another section in there where he was talking about this was his greatest failure. But for a Jedi, failure is his greatest teacher. Forgiveness is the path to strength. Understanding is the path to peace. And through peace comes power. So these are all like very
poignant.
Yeah, no, for sure. And just stuff that we don't normally get from the comics. Like this is stuff we would expect from like Claudia Gray and some of the stuff that we saw in Master and Apprentice. But for, an 8-page comic, there was some really great writing that I thought he did here with the comic itself and the story and the writing it. So,
yep.
I don't know. Anything else on this one that we need to touch on, talk about?
No, overall good story. Just a little disappointed kind of where it landed, but yeah.
I got a
like
question
this one.
for you.
First special is really good. What's up?
Yeah. So there was a moment in here with Yoda where he said that when he went out hunting, he took a bow and arrow with him. And there was a moment in there where they said that he wouldn't, I'm going to forget now, and I don't have it pulled up in front of me, that he would not use a lightsaber. I'm going to paraphrase here, but basically it said that he would not use a lightsaber to hunt. That
Right.
was almost like,
Like
it was
sacrilegious.
Yeah,
or
exactly. That you wouldn't use it.
Yeah, kind of like sully the intent of the weapon.
Does that align with your perspective of what the weapon is and a Jedi?
Yeah.
And because to me, it feels like if I'm a Jedi, I'm a Jedi. I would just use that. And if I can't, then why would I use a bow and arrow? Why wouldn't I just use an arrow and use the Force to shoot the arrow through the animal rather than having to go all primitive on me, on the animal. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's an impersonal thing. And if you're trying to connect with the living force, man, I'm grasping here at straws.
Yeah, you're doing me now.
Yeah, right. But I mean, you could, from Yoda's spiritual perspective, you might be able to see that though, because he does firmly believe in these. I mean, this is where Qui-Gon and him, I think they did have their moments of alignment with the living force. And I could see where he feels like he needs to have this connection to the being to where you connect more. But we have this in our culture too, right? Where we want to sometimes reconnect with the past, and hunting and some of those aspects. Like you see that a little bit. People want to do, go out with a bow and arrow, and it's not for sport. It's for they'll, consume everything that they bring in. And it's not, he does this out of necessity. So he basically has deprived himself only eating plants whenever he could until he can't really sustain himself, which goes to the point you were making earlier about he's a shell of himself, both probably physically as well as overall. But it's but he's basically, he only has to do this for sustenance. So he has a deep regret that he even needs to go do this and that he can't just live off of what he has, but plants only go so far.
That's true. And that should be the moral of any lesson. Plants only go so far.
That's right.
No, I like that answer. We'll take it.
All right.
Survey says. All right, let's talk about the last one. We'll get to the Luke story. The Luke story is called, we didn't mention the Yoda story. The name of the story was The Trial of Dagobah. So the trial being
falling rocks.
Yeah. All right. This one is called Fight or Flight. And it says, for years, the heroic Rebel Alliance has fought to free the galaxy from the evil Galactic Empire. But the Emperor and his powerful apprentice Darth Vader are close to crushing the freedom fighters once and for all. And turning the young Rebel hero and Jedi in training Luke Skywalker to the dark side might all but ensure their victory. As Luke grows stronger in the ways of the Force, so do the challenges and temptations he faces. And I guess to recap this story, again, this is kind of set just before the events of Return of the Jedi. You've got Luke Skywalker, Jedi Knight. He's kind of been turning the tide for the rebellion. And he's being pursued by Vader and the Emperor in an attempt to lure Skywalker to the dark side. The Emperor reaches out with the dark side of the Force to kind of tempt Luke into giving into his hate and start down a path that will, to coin a phrase, forever control his destiny. This temptation fails, and Luke and this rebel major from the Rebel Alliance manage to kind of save the rebel squad that they're tied up with, and they're able to kind of secure some valuable coaxium as an end result. So that's kind of the storyline in terms of what happens beginning to end. This was a very interesting story, more than the other two. I would probably say this was my favorite one. Would you agree there?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So thoughts about this one?
Yeah, I think a couple of things that we liked about this. One, we got to see Jedi Luke in action, leadership. Really, we've only seen him at Jabba's palace. And then, of course, we see him in the throne room at the end of Jedi. But to see him really coming into his own and to, kind of boots on the ground with everybody else in the rebellion, I thought was pretty neat. And it has been a while for us to see this Luke Skywalker.
Yeah.
And we had talked recently that it seemed like they were avoiding Luke Skywalker, I think, in this era. And this was really kind of cool to see finally resurface and to see how he's inspiring others around him and to see the legend that he's already built around himself. Of course, that will be a bit of his undoing later on. But I really enjoyed that aspect of it. It was really refreshing when they showed the panel of him in his black outfit, green lightsaber humming. I was like, wow, that was really cool. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
There were some, I think the Emperor, so the Emperor was also really, really interesting. And to the point where we might have to do a completely different show on it, but like his ability to influence was really, well, it also leads me into some of the things that had not an issue, but were confusing. This issue confused me in places, and comics can do this when they jump around a little bit because it was difficult to tell. And maybe this was the intent. It was really difficult to tell what was reality. So what was actually happening until it all kind of gets undone. So the Emperor is basically, it's difficult to see. Is he putting thoughts into Luke's head, or he's just strengthening the thoughts, the doubts, and the things that Luke already has? Because some things start going wrong, and Luke is trying to influence the Major and these others. Hey, we've got to get out of here. Something doesn't feel right. Luke is already sensing the Emperor. He doesn't know it's the Emperor, but he's sensing something is wrong, and they won't listen. And the Emperor starts to emphasize, you should just take control. None of these fools won't listen to you. You just need to tell them what they need to do. And if they just listen to it, they would be all the better for it. And then things go horribly wrong. And the ship blows up. And again, this is like, oh, did this actually happen? And then he basically flee, run away. This is even better. So run away, go live this other life, which was very reminiscent of the Last Jedi prologue, where Luke is having this dream of a different life.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I liked, there were a lot of things I liked about it, but it was a little bit confusing at the same time. I was not a fan of the artwork, though. It was very jarring, and moments were really good. Others were not what I prefer. I hate saying that because people put a lot of work in this, but it was really inconsistent for me.
Yeah, I would agree. Like, there are moments in there where like Luke looks like Luke, and then there are other moments where that's not Luke. Doesn't look like him at all.
Same with the Emperor. Oh man.
Yeah.
All over the place.
Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack there. I would say, yes, I agree. Seeing Luke in that full page where you first see him, because they kind of tease you when Luke enters into the storyline. He's in his X-Wing pilot uniform, right? His little orange outfit, and you're thinking, okay, no big deal. We've seen this before. And then he explodes. I mean, he's like exploding onto the page, in that black outfit with his green lightsaber, and taking on these Imperial security droids like the K2SO droids, which is kind of cool because we didn't really get to see them much before Rogue One, and now they keep popping up here and there in different places. So it's nice to see that they're being consistent there. But yeah, not only did we get to see him in action, but we got to see him using his force power, at least, having the feeling that something was about to happen and protecting the troops. And there was a moment in there where they were kind of talking amongst themselves, like, wow, that's Luke Skywalker, the Luke Skywalker, right? The legend was building here. It already been building. I mean, he's been, the hero of the Rebel Alliance now for all of the better part of, 6 years or whatever it is at this point, or I'm not sure how long this one or where this one takes place, but for definitely a while now, and people know who he is. So that was kind of all really cool to see and cool to hear. The part that you're mentioning where he kind of drifts off into the storyline, or I guess the vision or dreamland, if you will, I would agree. I had to go back and read it at least 2 or 3 times to really try to make a good understanding of whether or not this was really happening, or was this a vision? Was it the Emperor that was doing it, or was this Luke? And I don't know where I landed on it. I mean, I think overall it probably doesn't matter unless we really want to dive into the power of Palpatine and what he's actually able to do, and how he was able to influence somebody like this at that level, that far away, which I think is maybe what you were hitting on. Like, wow, where did this come from? But yeah, the whole storyline, when he drifts off, he's suddenly back on. He's like you mentioned, the ship blew up. They leave, him and R2, and he basically just retreats this like farmland planet, and shows up, and there's a scene in there where he's kind of walking away. He puts down his rebel helmet, he puts down the lightsaber, tells R2, we don't need those anymore. That's he's kind of basically saying that's a life that I'm leaving. I'm never coming back to that life. And sets up, and now he's got this he's helping the small farm community kind of rebuild and that sort of thing. Then next thing he's married, or at least he's got a wife, or 3 kids and a mom, if you will. And then he snaps out of it because R2 is the one that snaps him out of it. There's a little beep there. I don't know if you caught that, but that's how he came out of that vision. And then once he comes out of the vision, he realizes that the ship never blew up. He's still in that exact moment just before. And that's when him and the Major decide that they're going to, concoct a little scheme here to kind of get the Imperial fighters to follow them so that the rebels can get away. And then at the very end of the comic, they all kind of reunite, and he allows the Major to bathe in the glory of rescuing everybody. He says, "This is your moment, not mine," kind of thing, which I thought was kind of a neat little gesture for Luke to do, given how popular he is. But Yeah. So overall, I would say my thoughts on this one, again, it was probably the better of the three that we're talking about tonight. It's always good to have more, Luke Skywalker stories. I would agree that the artwork wasn't that great, but I felt like the writing was really good at moments, especially that you kind of hit it. In fact, I took a screenshot of it, but the whole scene right before the Emperor is able to kind of subdue him into this vision, and he's putting this doubt in him. I thought was some great writing where he's just talking about how he's trying to convince Luke that these guys are below him, that they should have listened to him, that they're petty, that they're making mistakes, and he should just take control of the whole thing. And then he starts talking about all the pain that he's having, all the grieving, the guilt. It's all too much. I mean, he's really trying to get into his head and try to get him to kind of use his power for bad. But
but some of that was also a little, I don't know, is Luke that susceptible at this time? And I think the answer is yeah, he probably still is. He's still young, right?
Yeah.
He's not really encountered. You could argue in Empire that he was tempted, right, by power and maybe hesitated and thought about it. But at the same time, this is a completely different level of something he's not had to experience yet. And I think that's interesting. I think that's where this plays into it. I like the idea that Palpatine has this ability, like we saw in Last Jedi, right, of being able to span the galaxy with his influence or with his thoughts. And they were very careful to say that he really couldn't do it all the way. Luke couldn't quite hear him. He couldn't see where Luke was. Luke definitely couldn't see the Emperor back, right? But they hesitated in some of that to maybe limit maybe what Palpatine is capable of, or just to, gray it and blur that line a little bit about, is he really able to do some of this? Because we've seen a variety of things that he can do in Clone Wars. But anyway, I really did like it though. Preying on his doubts, preying on a bit of his hubris, all the themes that we've seen that especially in the sequel trilogy that we know about Luke will actually come to pass. And it was nice to see some of these seeds of doubt already being placed in there, and then leaving the lightsaber, sinking the ship. Of course, we know some of that stuff happens later on.
Yeah, there was definitely some foreshadowing there.
A lot of foreshadowing, right?
I got a question that another one that just seemed to me, it always seems like being petty here. But when you saw him in that very first panel with him with the green lightsaber, did it bother you at all? Because maybe it's headcanon, right? This never truly happened. But my perception or thinking around where Luke Skywalker built his green lightsaber was on Tatooine moments before before he went into Jabba's palace and Return of the Jedi.
Right.
And this wouldn't align with it. Correct?
Nope. Yeah, no, you're right.
And so when I saw it, I was like, well, why is he using a green lightsaber? He hasn't even built this yet. But then again, I think about it, I'm like, okay, well, that scene was technically cut out and was never, truly canonized. It was never part of the original storyline. But that was the only thing. I mean, I don't know. It was kind of petty. I guess I wish he had to come in with something, right? I mean, he wouldn't have a lightsaber at this point unless he was able to find someone else's lightsaber or something. I don't know. We don't know what he's been doing or what all he had been doing after the events of The Empire Strikes Back, in between that and Return of the Jedi. But anyways, it stood out to me when I saw it. I was like, whoa, he's not supposed to have that yet, but I'm willing to let it go because, again, not been canonized.
Well, and again, you're right, because we always just made the natural conclusion that, well, he's on Tatooine, he builds it. What else are you going to do on Tatooine? Let's go save Han, right?
Yeah, right.
Let's follow through with the plan that we've already had in motion for a while. So that there's other things that happened in between. Now there's a lot of ambiguity of, okay, how long between Empire and Jedi? Did he construct the lightsaber? And then, what else was he out there doing? And I think this is where, again, I'm willing to give the comics a little bit of latitude in some of this, because they have to navigate these really odd spaces sometimes.
Yeah.
And you have to give them a little bit of liberty. I think the thing that we keep coming back to that's difficult with the comics, at least with some of these stories, is that they're canon and that they continue to stretch this canon idea, and how much are we willing to accept of it being canon And quite honestly, how much of it is necessary to be really, formally introduced as canon, right? And so they're fun stories, they're entertaining, but is it kind of pushing this thing just maybe a touch too far a little bit with some of this? Actually, I was having a conversation with Katie tonight about Galaxy's Edge and canon and some of that. And I think we both aligned a little bit of the idea of canon these days is just, it's everywhere. It's almost like canon overload that everything matters all of a sudden.
Yeah,
but
right.
The stories themselves are still pretty contained and small and don't really have to matter too much from a broader canon sense, And
I would imagine they would. My theory is that at some point they may massage the definition of what canon means, and I don't think they'll regress back to different levels of canon and that kind of thing. But I think they'll allow themselves a little bit more liberty of what they can and should or should not be doing in order to tell a story and all that. But
right.
I think we can kind of see that, to your point. I think we can kind of see it now especially with Galaxy's Edge. I mean, it's about to get bigger, right? This is about to blow up even more than we can imagine at this point with all the new shows coming out, the new movies, and there's just going to be so much content out there. I can't expect them to reasonably keep all of this 100% canon or, truth without allowing people to kind of take some creative liberties here and there.
Sure.
But all right, well, that's going to do it for the comics and the main show. We've got some shout outs. We got one at least from Kevin, who left us a 5-star review. Thank you so much, Kevin. Kevin's a huge supporter of us. He's very active on our social media pages, and he's been that way for a while. It's just been great that he finally had a chance to give us a review here. He gave us a 5-star review. It says, it says impressive, most impressive. So good lead in there. I've only just discovered the podcast, and I've got to say I'm absolutely loving it. The hosts are brilliant, funny, and very insightful. He's talking about you, not me. I'm a massive Star Wars fan, but don't have friends who share my passion, so it's great that I can listen to this. I find myself nodding in agreement or shaking my head at something I don't agree with. I love the character dissections, in particular, the psychology studies, and this is Kevin from Liverpool, UK. I hope he's a Liverpool fan, Liverpool soccer fan. If you are, I'm right with you, buddy. But anyways, thank you, Kevin, so much. Kevin Millen for sending that review. And that's, I could have wrote this myself 4 years ago,
thing,
right? Yeah, this is exactly what we were doing.
Exactly. This is the exact same thing we did for a long time.
Yep.
So yeah, we're glad to have you, Kevin. It's really cool. He's real active over on Facebook. So if you follow us on Facebook, be sure to tell Kevin hi and get to interact with him. He seems like a pretty cool guy.
Cool. What do we got going on the network these days?
Yeah, network. Over on the Film Appraisers, they just did a show on, or I think they've done the reaction show by now on the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So if you're a Quentin Tarantino Quentin Tarantino fan,
yeah,
it is a family-friendly podcast, even though they're talking about very not family-friendly content for the most part.
How did they pull that one off?
Apparently, yeah, they did it. They somehow did. So they did a expectation show, and then they've seen the movie. Just recently came out in the last week or two, and now they're going to do a reaction show. They've had a giveaway over there on social media. So it's a lot of fun. Smoking and Drinking in Space. I got to give them a shout out too, because, and this is right up your alley, they just talked about Earth Girls Are Easy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So these great, I use the word great pretty
Who picked
loosely.
that
one? I think that's just what they have a list.
Oh, it was on.
And so
okay, yeah.
Tim and Crowley and Rob just kind of pick one, I think, at the end of each episode, and they pulled that one. And
oh,
man,
I haven't heard that one yet. I'm gonna go. I got to listen to that one.
it's right up your alley, man.
Yeah.
So definitely go give them a check as well. And we've got some fun things brewing in the background that are going to take a little while to get to with Eargler Media, but we are excited about some things coming down the road too. But certainly go check those two shows out.
Cool. All right. Well, that's going to do it for us on this show. Be sure to follow us on all our social media pages, Patreon, Discord, that sort of thing. We'll put the links in the show notes for you guys. Definitely appreciate you and all the support that you continue to provide for us in all those formats. And next week, we'll be back with a listener feedback question answer show again. We've been queuing these up. If you hadn't had a chance, you guys can send us those questions. Please do so on social media pages, or if you're in Discord, we've got a channel there where you can post the questions, and we'll queue them all up and try to give you some really good answers. And if we can't give you good answers, we'll make up some really bad answers, which we're really good at doing. So, and anything before we head out today?
No, we better go out before Yoda has another epiphany.
I think, yeah, he's had quite a few of them. So, all right. Well, we'll see you guys next week.
You're still listening? Wow, that's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property and all that other good, fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.